Welcome back to Week 9 Marine Life, and in video 3 we are going to talk about the habitats and conditions that these organisms have to adapt to. So these marine critters in some instances have to live in very, very harsh environments, and some of those include variations based on location, season, depth in the ocean. When you're living along a coastline, there's a lot more variation than in the deep ocean. And the reason for that are tides, because those tides are fluctuating up and down, sometimes twice a day. So some of those organisms are going to be exposed twice a day to the air when they normally are living in the ocean. Some other conditions that some of these organisms have to adapt to include changes in salinity, temperature, dissolved oxygen, light, and water pressure. So we can actually divide these coastal habitats into 3 different categories: estuaries, sandy beaches and dunes, and the rocky intertidal. First that we'll look at are estuaries. We visited an estuary on one of our field trips. And if you guys remember, that estuary at low tide was extremely muddy, super goopy, and the mud was not very pleasant smelling because there was lots and lots of organic matter and material breaking down. So these estuaries tend to be pretty shallow, and when the tides fluctuate up and down, we periodically have times where that mud is exposed to the air, and then times when that mud is covered in seawater. So we have changes in temperature. So when we have that seawater come rushing in, cooler seawater comes in, temperature goes down, tide goes out, that mud is exposed to sunlight, temperature goes up because that mud is darker in color and it absorbs that heat energy much more than the water would. So we have variations in temperature, so this can happen once a day or twice a day. We also have differences in salinity. So in some parts of that estuary, we have conditions that fluctuate from lots of salt water, so when the tide comes in, and then less salt water, more fresh water when that tide goes out, and we have just the river water rushing out of the river channel. So pretty intense changes and fluctuations that happen in these estuaries. So that's temperature, salinity, and then exposure to air changes quite a bit. So some of those organisms that live in these estuaries have to be prepared for that. So a lot of these critters burrow themselves into the mud, and when that tide goes out, they tend to seal themselves up. So things like clams tend to seal themselves up with a little bit of water inside their shells so they can survive while that tide is out. You see this a lot in the rocky intertidal as well. So the estuaries can be these muddy type environments, and they can also have lots of green growing material, so things like mangroves, maybe some grasses that can withstand the fluctuations between fresh and salt water as well. So we've got mangroves here, the muddy environment like what we saw on our field trip, and then kind of grassy lands that can withstand those fluctuations back and forth between fresh and salt. And then just to remind you what our field trip looked like, the Tillamook Bay mud flat that I tromped out and collected this mud sample in, pretty muddy, pretty stinky, and a pretty interesting environment. Lots of fluctuation in this area. It's a pretty harsh environment. So those are estuaries. Next category are sandy beaches and dunes. And in these types of environments, very different critters that live. One of the things along a sandy beach that these guys have to adapt to is the fluctuation in sand. So when your long-short drift changes, when the seasons shift, and you have winter storm waves pulling sands away from that beach, summer bringing that sand back, these organisms need to be prepared for that. So a lot of these can actually burrow themselves deeper, so things like razor clams, you can see here, are ones that bury themselves in the sand, and then sand dollars that can actually move on their own. And I have a little video, 2 videos to show you that involve the movement of these sand dollars. So when you play these links are also on the course website. There's some very artistic music that pops up along with it. I've muted it. You can see this critter very, very slowly moving along the surface of the sand. Now, these sand dollars are moving super, super slow, and when you see them normally, once they're dead, all you end up seeing are just the nice white surface. That you end up, the white colored shell. You don't see these little spines on here. So the second video that we're going to look at here, you can see those spines moving back and forth. And this is how these sand dollars move, these spines that you don't normally see because they've fallen off once that sand dollar dies. So when you find the white sand dollar pieces on the beach, those spines are gone. And see a closer look at those spines. This is how they actually bury themselves. They move one or two pieces of sand at a time over themselves to cover them up in the sand and escape predators. It's pretty amazing. So this picture up here, where this sand dollar is burying itself, it's actually moving the sand over on top of itself. Pretty amazing. So those are sandy beaches. You'll see birds and sandpipers running up and down the beach as well. So you can get not only these invertebrates, but you can see birds that are going to fluctuate and move from place to place as well. Dune environments, this is going to be all on land, but we kind of put it in this category because sometimes tides can get really high and waves can come up, but it's also in that coastal zone. And those sand dunes tend to be covered in beach grass with birds, a variety of different types of birds that live in those sand dunes. So this is on the Oregon coast. These other two pictures are pictures of a type of plant in Hawaii that lives in the sand. So it likes sandy, well-drained soils. It can withstand changes in salinity. So when the tide gets really high, brings in salt water, this organism, this plant can actually withstand that, which is pretty amazing. So all of these plants and animals that live in the coastal portions of the ocean are pretty hardy organisms that can withstand some pretty amazing conditions. The temperature changes, the salinity changes, and the changes in exposure to air versus water. The next category we're going to look into is the rocky intertidal. This is where we're going to visit on our field trip to the coast. We're going to visit some tide pools. And these are amazing environments. These critters have to withstand changes in tides. So 2 times, maybe 1 or 2 times a day, they're exposed to the air, to the atmosphere. They're tide pools that are left over once the tide goes out are exposed to sunlight. They can warm up, water evaporates, salinity can increase. So these guys have to be ready for that. And some of these organisms like sea stars can move. They can migrate back and forth. So sometimes if they're in a risky environment, they can move themselves into one of these tide pools and kind of get away from drying out. That risk is pretty high. Some other things like mussels can't move. They're stuck, so they tend to close up and seal their shells up so that they don't dry out. So they trap that moisture inside. Sea urchins have these spines. These can also move on their own, so they tend to hide when that tide goes out. And those sea urchins are what eat kelp. So you'll see these huge kelp forests, is what they call them, in the ocean. You see the kelp kind of at the surface of the ocean. And sometimes these kelp forests get just totally decimated, and that's because of these sea urchins that are just mowing and eating them up. We see sun stars. So some of these sun stars have multiple arms, 10 to 12. Normal, regular sea stars tend to only have 5. Some of them can be covered in spines. They can be red. They can be purple, all different colors. Pretty amazing stuff. And these sea stars, or starfish as people call them, are pretty amazing. They move and attach themselves to the rocks basically by suctioning themselves on. So what they have are these tube feet that you can see in this picture, and these 2 feet will actually move around and grasp onto things. These 2 feet are what help them move from place to place. They're mini suction cups, so they'll very slowly move each of these to help them move from one place to another. And these are also what help them eat. So when these sea stars are looking for a food source, they tend to eat mussels and shellfish. They will wrap themselves around the shell and use that suction cup for those little 2 feet to pry open that shell and then start to digest that mussel right in its shell. It's pretty amazing. So if you see one of these sea stars and it's wrapped up around something, leave it alone. It's enjoying its meal, so you wouldn't want someone coming along poking and prodding at you while you were eating your dinner. So when we're at the coast, we're going to be very respectful of these organisms because they are at low tide in a very stressed environment. They are already at risk. So when we explore these areas, feel free to touch things, pick things up, but when you're trying to get one of these sea stars, please be careful. If it doesn't want to come off, just leave it, because if you pull too hard, you rip these little 2 feet off, and then that organism is now impaired and could die. Another major thing that you see on the Oregon coast and along any rocky coastline is seaweed, or what's called rockweed. And there's lots and lots of different kinds. I have pictures of 3 different types here. This stuff can be really, really, really slippery. So as you're walking around on those tide pools, be very careful, because your feet will just slide out from under you. So these are the photosynthetic organisms. So this is going to be the producers, the bottom of the food chain for these tide pools. This is where the food source is coming from. We also see these sea anemones, and I have green ones in these pictures, but you can see pink, red, all different colors. You can see white ones sometimes, purple. So what we see here are ones that are totally open in the top 2 figures. So you see the tentacles on the outside and then its mouth in the very center. So when it's when it's in the actual ocean water in a tide pool, it will open up so that it can grasp some food. If it's submerged in water and it's totally closed, it's probably enjoying a meal. Again, leave it alone. If you see them closed up like this in this bottom picture here, yes, this is my foot, they are trying to conserve water. So these are exposed to air, and they tend to curl up and close up to try to keep some moisture trapped inside them so that they don't dry out and die. So when you see them curled up like this, please leave them alone, because if you start poking at them, might open up, and then they're going to be exposed and dry out and probably die. So we want to be respectful to these organisms. Some other critters that we see, things like barnacles, which are they're really, really sharp. So be very careful when you're walking around. You're going to want to wear shoes all the time. These barnacles are fixed, they're attached, they don't move. And also the mussels, same thing, they are fixed and attached to the rocks. So when you're walking around, please try not to walk on the mussels. They will break and crack the shells, and the organisms will die. So you're going to be very careful walking from place to place on these tide pools. Lots of stuff to squish. So these guys are fixed, attached. Once the water comes up and covers these, they'll tend to come out of their shells, open up, they start feeding, filtering water, and living their lives. Whereas at low tide, they tend to close up, kind of seal in that water so they don't dry out. 2 organisms that can migrate and move from place to place are crabs. There's all different varieties of crabs that you're going to see. This one's pretty big. This is about 4 or 5 inches across. You'll probably see ones that are much smaller, maybe only an inch or 2 in size. And then horseshoe crabs. I don't know if we'll see any of these. They tend to be more on the east coast. And then some other organisms that actually migrate in and out of the intertidal. These can, some of them like seals and whales, tend to come up closer to the coastline and then go up back out towards the sea. So we might see some seals. Again, you'll want to leave them alone. They can be pretty aggressive. They tend to come out on the rocks at low tide, sun themselves, relax, and then at high tide they'll go out into the ocean and feed. Birds. spend a lot of time. They tend to feed in these tide pool and intertidal environments. So you'll see birds hanging out, these cormorants. They actually dive into the ocean to get some of their food, but they lack the oils for their feathers to be kind of water repellent. So what they have to do is they have to dry their wings. So you'll see them kind of sitting there with their wings out on rocks, drying themselves out so they can fly a little bit easier. So in the open ocean, this is another habitat. We have things like whales, you can see seals, porpoises, dolphins. Some of the bigger things, these are going to be the nectonic organisms. The smaller planktonic organisms are things like these copepods, microscopic critters. Some of them are what are called photic, so they're going to use and need the light to produce their own food. Some of them are aphotic and they don't need any sunlight. They're going to be deeper into the deeper ocean. In some places, at night, some of these phosphorescent organisms, bacteria or single-celled plankton, will end up coming up towards the surface at night. When you disturb the water, you'll see tons of little sparkles because they are producing light when they're disturbed. It's pretty amazing. And there's a specific season for these. And in Maine right now is the season. So you go at night, disturb the water a little bit, and you'll just see this amazing kind of greenish glow in the water. Another ocean habitat is at mid-ocean ridges at the deep ocean basins. There's a great website for you to visit on the NOAA website, which you can see here. And if you move forward, you can see different videos and images of different things happening. A description of chemosynthesis versus photosynthesis. So pretty great resource for you to visit on your own time. So at these mid-ocean ridges is where we have chemosynthesis happening, where the producers of the food chain down in these environments are taking the stuff spewing out of these volcanic black smokers and turning it into something that can be eaten by some of the other critters that live there. Some of the things that live at these mid-ocean ridges, you'll see crabs, different types of clamshells, crabs living in these environments. So usually you only see these critters close to one of these thermal hotspots where you're going to have chemosynthesis occurring to be able to support this kind of life. And these pictures are all from NOAA. There's various explorations that they've gone on. I have a link to those on the course site here. The Ocean Explorer website, what they have are each year that they've gone on these different explorations, and then in 2012 alone they have at least 4 that are actually going on right now, which is pretty amazing. So they tend to keep up with sending pictures back, writing little summaries of what they've done, pictures, videos, maps. It's a pretty neat place, especially if you're looking for information for your project. Great resource. So some other organisms that you see at these mid-ocean ridges include tube worms. Over here you can see the red is the actual worm part, whereas the white is the tube that it lives in. So these are living on these hydrothermal vents. So we have these tube worms feeding on the chemosynthetic bacteria that's living in the water right around this hydrothermal vent. You can also have pretty amazing looking corals. Just so many different organisms that live in these areas. There's so many pictures I couldn't even think of putting all of them in. Ocean basins, a little different. A little bit more isolated environment, not as much stuff. Here's a picture of one of these ROVs heading down to the ocean basin. Pretty stark, not a whole lot. There's one little rock pillar that they found. They see things like different varieties of jellies. They see things that actually light up, that are producing light. Another type of jellyfish, a type of squid, a baby squid deep down in the ocean. Some have eyes that are really large, some don't have any at all because there's no light, so what's the point? And then here's a picture of them collecting some samples, some mussels, from the ocean floor. So this is how we actually know it's down there. You can collect samples and take pictures of what lives there. We also can see some other pretty crazy stuff. This huge arthropod, you can see the person holding it up, that lives down in the deep sea, this crustacean. And then also, where does the food come from? So you have these organisms that are living on the deep ocean floor. Some places there isn't any kind of warm thermal activity for chemosynthesis to happen. So a lot of those organisms rely on dead stuff falling from above. So out in the ocean, a whale dies. What does it do? Well, it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. And I have a really, really amazing time-lapse picture or video for you guys to watch. So this is a clip from the deep ocean, from planet Earth, and that they have shown is this carcass has fallen down to the deep ocean and the different organisms that are feeding on it. And eventually this will speed up. Here's those giant arthropods that you can see here. Pretty, just amazing. These are going to be almost a foot in size. And in a few seconds here, this will kind of speed up and show you what happens over time. And basically one of these carcasses sinks to the ocean floor, and organisms can catch that scent and just devour it, and all you're left with are bones at the very end. It's just absolutely amazing. There's all these organisms that just start collecting around this area. And then, of course, fighting at the very end over any bits and pieces that are left behind. And then the bones left behind, maybe some chemosynthesis can occur to break those down some more, but you're pretty much left with nothing. Pretty intense and amazing organisms, and this is all new information. We've only been exploring the deep ocean for maybe the last 20, 30 years, and just in the last 10 or 20 years, so much information has come back, and so many images, pictures, new species are being discovered. It's just absolutely amazing. So in the years to come, hopefully more of these explorations will be funded, and you'll get to see more amazing organisms and habitats. So, brief overview of some of the organisms that exist in the ocean, where they live, how they're classified, and what they have to adapt to. So I'm going to sign off with that, and we'll see you in lab.